So last week we talked about the Christ consciousness, and I'm just going to review that. So there's this infinite I am. We talk about God, God, one power, one presence. And it is, when it births itself into form, it becomes unique and individualized. So it's infinitely one, and it is unique and individualized. That Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness or Atman consciousness, it's that individualized expression of God as each and every one of us. So each and every one of us is infinitely eternal. There is that eternal essence of us, but that eternal essence is also unique. So just as we have a unique thumbprint, we have a unique soul print. And that's what we mean by Christ consciousness. And this Christ consciousness is birthless and deathless as us. So it's perfect. It's whole, perfect, and complete. You'll hear that a lot in the New Thought teaching. The essence of who everyone is, that's Christ, Buddha, soul within us, is whole, perfect, and complete. Nothing can ever hurt, harm, or endanger it. Nothing that's ever happened in your life will make it less. Nothing can ever take away from it, and nothing can be added on to it. There's no matter how hard you work, no matter how many spiritual practices you do, you can't make it more than it already is. It is already whole. It is already fulfilled. It is already fully in your enlightened self. And so the purpose of spiritual practices is to continue to take the layers off and to remind ourselves and remember this pure essence of who and what we are, which is the infinite I am, but also to remember who we are as this unique self. But it's not a unique self we're creating. It already is its unique self. We don't have to make that uniqueness happen. We don't need to make myself different by the clothes I wear or the way I do my hair. I can do that, but we're already unique. It's already inherent in who we are. Now, 2 weeks ago, I talked about waking up, growing up, and showing up. And I said there was a fourth one, cleaning up. And I didn't want to talk about cleaning up until we got into this Christ consciousness, because it's very important in our own spiritual life and in our journey to always anchor first there, in the truth of who and what we really are, that nothing can ever change. But then there's this relative side, and that's how we tend to experience ourselves most of the time. This is our body-mind experience. So I experience myself based on genetic predispositions. I experience myself based on how I was raised, my family, the environment, my culture. What I believe has a lot to do with being born in the United States versus being born in Japan. That there's all sorts of different inputs that have created this thing called Harriet Hawkins and how I show up. So it's not just a divine identity, it's a relative identity in my body. I had a out-of-body experience once where the name Harriet was floating around, and I was just staring at it and wondering, what is that name? And I was reading Little Woman, actually, and I was very identified with the character of Beth. And she dies, and that's what took me into this other place, and I saw the name Harriet floating around, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ceiling, and I was looking down at my body, and the name Harriet just floated over the body, and it was just this awareness, oh, this is who I am this lifetime. And as soon as I got that, I was right back in my body. And it was that dual experience of being, I had a definite I sense, this is who I am this lifetime. There was an I, but it wasn't limited to just Harriet. Harriet was a temporary experience. So Harriet has all her stuff. She's got stuff from this lifetime. She's got the baggage from the family, from the genetics, from whatever. And this is what Ken Wilber was talking about, that we have to acknowledge that this stuff happens, that we are human beings and that we are psychological, and that does play a part in our life. In traditional mystical teaching, the focus is on transcending this human body, lay your treasures up in heaven, wake up and know nirvana. So to be in this blissful transcendent state where we don't have to experience the pain and suffering of humanity. So the first noble truth in Buddhism, life is suffering. And the purpose of Buddhism is to transcend that suffering by no longer identifying with it. So that becomes a big part of a lot of spiritual practices. And what Ken Wilber is advocating for, and he's just a main articulator, he's certainly not the sole person articulating this viewpoint. He's inspired a lot by Sri Aurobindo, who I'm reading a lot of these days. And Sri Aurobindo says, well, you could make your whole your whole journey about transcending, he said, but the infinite spirit delights in its unique. It's all it gets, all its power and delight through its individual expression. So why you'd want to spend your journey ignoring that or trying to get rid of this beautiful, delightful, powerful, unique expression is beyond me. Why would you want to do that? But we want to get away from it because it hurts. Because when we're in our relative sense, we experience pain, we experience suffering, we have our limitations, we experience our finiteness. And so what we want to do is to be able to start integrating those places in us that are finite and learn to deal with them with skillful means. And what I mean by that is I don't think we can ever cure, finally, our finiteness. We will have our limitations as long as we're in a human body. That's part of being in the human relative form. So someone like Jesus, he got angry. He was transcendent, but he also got angry at the money changers. Before the soldiers came to take him to Pontius Pilate, he was afraid. He was sad. He had all these human emotions. He didn't stop being human. And that's why he's such a good example of what it means to be on the spiritual path of both being divine and human. We still have these human stuff that comes up that can overtake us. I heard a minister that felt that it was very wrong for Jesus to get mad at the money changers, that he was out of his spiritual self and his human self, and he was crucified because he got angry. I had to take that in. But however we interpret it, the fact is he did get angry. And we do get angry. We do get sad. Things that trigger us from outside. So the idea that we want to live an integral life is to start owning these different aspects of ourselves, recognizing that the relative is important. It's not just the transcendent, the eternal that's important, even the relative. So we have the Tibetan monks. I'm sure most of you are familiar with those beautiful sand sculptures that they do. So they'll spend weeks creating a very intricate, incredibly beautiful sand sculpture with all these different colors. When I was at OCSL, we had Tibetan monks who came over and did it. They spent days, and every detail is important. It's important. It's not just sort of like, we'll just put this here and there. It doesn't matter. It's relative, so let's just put it together. No, every detail is important. They spend all day long creating this, day after day, and then as soon as it's done, they wipe it off. They wipe it clean. They don't take pictures of it. Other people might. They don't glue it, try not to make it move. And that's their point. It's like this great manifestation of what life is. We care about the details, even though we know it's temporary. Because even the details, even the relative is God. Even our relative experience, Harriet, Michelle, Kyle's all right? We're all relative. We just come and we go. But it's all God. So we place attention on it. And the other reason why we need to keep calling this to our attention is because when we are in that whole place, and this has been a growth point for us in New Thought. When we are in that whole place, when everything is whole, perfect, and complete, and the purpose is to identify ourselves all the time as much as possible with this wholeness and this perfection, what you will hear some of the New Thought original writers will say, God sees no pain. God sees no mistakes. When we're in that perfected state, when all we see is God and we see all His perfection, mistakes don't happen, suffering doesn't exist, because that's all illusion, and now you're in reality. And in fact, there's truth to that. For anyone who's had any altered state or mystical experience, suddenly all the things that seemed really important and seemed so are gone. But what that can allow us to do is do what many of you already are aware of, is what we call spiritual bypass, is stay in that transcendent state and then act out on this human state in ways that are very unconscious and very unskillful, because it doesn't matter. Because we're not placing our attention there. Well, that's not real anyway. So part of our evolution spiritually is to start saying it's all real and it's all important, and not to beat ourselves up when we act out, because we're still human beings. That's next week is forgiveness. We need to stay in that forgiveness place, but to start learning about ourselves humanly as well as spiritually. That is an essential part of spiritual practices. So on Tuesday night, we're creating our daily spiritual practice, and we're including that. So every day, we're touching into different aspects of ourself, our perfect spirit and our human self. How do we do that? Teresa gave a wonderful example. When something out there annoys us, we know that's something that we've projected out there because we don't want to own it. And so I'm going to give an example, but before I do, I'm going to give a spiritual way of handling it and what a little bit about what Ken Wilber was talking about. In witnessing meditation, Vipassana meditation, it's not that you don't acknowledge that you have anger. So if anger starts arising, you say, anger's arising, I watch it. I'm watching it, anger's arising, anger's arising. You don't say my anger, you say the anger. And the purpose of that is to start disassociating yourself, to not identify with the anger. You start separating because the infinite I am, the Christ self, isn't angry. It's the human self that's angry. And so part of the spiritual process is to start associating and identifying more with your whole perfect and complete self and not with the limited self. It's an incredibly powerful practice where we start witnessing. That's how you have so many of these Hindu gurus who do these incredibly excruciating, painful things. I don't know why. I was telling friends because I saw a documentary of all these Hindu gurus that come to the Ganges, and they're all doing these crazy physical things to show that they don't feel any pain. But I only remember one of them. It's one guy he's like a stick around his testicles, and he's twisting them around and around, and you just go, oh! And he's just like, doesn't hurt at all. I don't know. So you get wild stuff, people doing. But at the same time, he had no teeth, and he goes, I'd love to go to America, but I have no money. He could transcend his body and his pain because he was no longer identifying with it, but he hadn't integrated his human self yet. So Paramahansa Yogananda acknowledged that when he came over to teach meditation and to help people have direct experiences of God, to wake up to God, he also said, and the West has a lot to teach the East, because in India there's an incredible amount of suffering, there's an incredible amount of poverty, and America really seems to be much more engaged in the world, and India has a lot to learn from America. And that's this point of integrating, where East and the West, the heaven and the earth, we want to integrate all of it into our life and not reject any of it. God is all of it. So I'm going to just give myself as an example, and probably, I know it looks different for everybody, but just to get the basic idea of what it means to own a dark side. So as far as I knew, I grew up in the most perfect family ever. It's very nice to grow up in a perfect family. Great parents, great brothers. We had plenty of money, life. I had no crisis, no drama. And then I go off to college, and I remember my first relationship with a boy. And, well, actually, I was with him in high school, but it really got more serious in college. And now I'm away from my family. And suddenly, all this rage, I would just get furious. And I remember the very first time I yelled, because I don't remember ever yelling in anger before. And I was so shocked. Wait a minute, I'm the nice, sweet girl. What the heck? And it was just, and it would come out, and then it would start happening more frequently, this rage, and it would freak me out. So in Ken Wilber's example, if I was practicing Vipassana meditation, I could just start practicing, there's the anger, there's the anger, there's the anger. But I'm actually not doing anything with the anger. I'm disassociating from it, but the anger is still very fully present in Harriet, the human being. And I haven't transmuted it or transformed it or brought any depth of wisdom to it. So my boyfriend and I broke up, but I started seeing a therapist. And because the emotional intensity was now out of the way, I couldn't remember why I was getting angry. So the first 6 months, the poor therapist had to work really hard. So what are the issues? I didn't have any issues. I really had a good family. Every week, I just sit in this office, and it was just like, I had this great family. And then my mom came to Boston, and she said, Harriet, your dad and I are separating. I've been very unhappy in the marriage. And crash, this whole illusion of the perfect family comes crashing down. And suddenly, and actually it was my dad, God bless him, who suggested I go to a therapist because he knew this was coming, and he wanted me to develop a relationship with someone. So when it came, I'd be in relationship with a therapist, and it worked perfectly. And that's exactly what happened. I did. I crashed. Suddenly my family, relooking at everything, relooking at my childhood, looking at all the stuff that had been repressed and put away, and how I repressed so much, and it wasn't anything big and dramatic. It was just all those moments of feeling invisible, and like I didn't matter because it was very male and achievement oriented, and I was emotional and sensitive and really didn't want to conquer the world, so I didn't know where I fit. So it was all this pain. I remember just sleeping on the couch for a month, just realizing, oh my gosh, I had terrible parents. It was awful. I felt so unloved and unvalued and worthless, and all this stuff I thought was great wasn't. And then my parents asked us to come home to pack up our rooms. They were going to separate houses, and was the confusing part. I go home, and all I could remember was joyful memories. And now I'm really baffled. And this is because how did I have all these joyful memories if my parents were so miserable and awful? And this is what we do. We like to make a one statement. This is who I am. This is my story. We are multidimensional beings. We have so many aspects to ourselves. So on one hand, I can feel completely unloved. On the other hand, I know I'm totally loved. I feel completely unworthy. On the other hand, I feel totally worthy. That we have so many aspects of ourselves, and what we notice is what do we key in at certain times. So the rage was just a part of an aspect of myself. It wasn't my whole childhood. It was an aspect of myself that I had disowned, that I had not owned and said, there's this part of me that feels very valueless and worthless. And when I'm in an intimate relationship, that worthlessness emerges, and I blame that other person. They don't love me. They don't care about me. They aren't treating me with value, because that was all coming up from within me. So this is the beauty of therapy. It made me start seeing and owning that I carried this around with me. Nobody was making me feel this way. I owned it. Great. Many years later, I'm in another relationship. The rage starts coming out again, and now I'm really upset. I'm like, well, I know intimately my childhood. I can explain exactly why I'm angry, but I still get angry. It doesn't stop me from getting angry. It doesn't stop me from getting triggered that this person doesn't love me or they're not treating me like I care, that I matter. And so that's when I practice Vipassana, because now I've owned. Now I've said, okay, I get that the worthlessness is coming from me, but when they treat me a certain way, I start to feel it. So what I started to do, and I had a practitioner, a spiritual counselor helping me with this. Reverend Joan was my practitioner. And so the rage would start to emerge, and she said, just witness it, just watch it. Don't judge it. Don't try to do anything with it. Just watch when the rage arises. So the rage would arise, and I'd be watching it, and I could immediately see where it was arising from. It was arising from all this sense of worthlessness, from all the pain, and suddenly I would get underneath the anger into the pain that was causing the anger, the suffering and the not enoughness, and all of a sudden this deep compassion would come out. And I would just suddenly, the rage would just dissolve immediately. And all I felt was compassion for myself. I didn't need anything from that other person. I didn't need to get anything, any validation. It was all coming from me. That's the difference between doing therapy and start owning what's going underneath that anger. It's not just saying, here's an emotion arising, here's an emotion arising. What's causing that emotion? That's where the therapy, or you can dream work or counseling. There's incredible, I knew people who went to a spiritual psychology program in Los Angeles, and that did the same thing. It was a group counseling experience. So there's many ways we can get at it, but we need to go into the stuff of our life. We can't just do the spiritual stuff and hope that it will resolve on its own. We are human beings. We have pain. We have triggers. I can get triggered by something that you do. And so I can get triggered by something Michelle does, and Bev won't get triggered at all. Because it's not about Michelle, it's about me. It's about what's going on inside of me. So there's different practices that we can do that are very simple. I'm going to give one very simply. If you start coming on Tuesday nights, we'll go into it more deeply. Different people are bringing different heart practices to own the darker side. But one is a very simple one. Someone triggers me. I talk about it as an object. Harriet's really, do you mind if I'll use Jack, because I won't want to waste. So let's say, I'm going to use controlling. Jack's controlling, and Harriet's really triggered about that, and I start writing third person. So now I'm just distancing myself from it. You can do this about a dream, too, if you have a dream that bothers you. And then I go to second person. Now I start getting in dialogue with a thing that I don't like. I don't like that he's controlling. So I start writing a dialogue between Jack and myself. I can do it writing out or in my head. Jack, I don't like it when you're controlling because I feel like you don't think I'm capable of doing things and you have to oversee me and blah, blah, blah. The story is very important because let's say Michelle is controlling, but her style of controlling doesn't bother me. It's his style of controlling. So it's not just control. It's the way he controls. And what I'm going to start finding is I go back and forth, and Jack says, well, did you know, and I hate when this happens, this actually has happened in relationships too. Did you know you do that too? Do you know that there are times where you don't see me and you want to control things? And this is just, you start getting in this dialogue, and sometimes I can do it in this 3-2-1 process, a second in my head. Other times, if it's really deep, it takes hours of this dialogue process before I really can own that what he's doing I have inside of me. Because a lot of times I am so clear that is not inside of me. Now, I do not do that. He does that, but I am so clear I don't do that. So, and I'm serious. Even though I know all this, it'll take me a long time to get to my own ownership. And that's the I. So 3, 2, 1. Third person, second person, and then the I is where I start to own it. When I am controlling, this is what's happening for me. I'm in fear. I feel like I need to hold because I think things may be out of control. And then suddenly your heart just opens and there's incredible compassion. And then if there was an actual issue between Jack and I, if I've done my work, if I've owned it, I can still have a conversation with him about it, but now it's not a conversation of blame. Now it's a conversation of infinite compassion, of infinite, here's what you're doing, here's what I'm doing, and let's just, how can we resolve this? Love is always the answer. Love is always the answer. If we haven't gotten to the love, the reason why we don't own things is because we can't see the love. We can't get to that place of love and compassion for ourselves, which is why we project it out there. I notice a lot of times in our culture, we are more willing to own the victim part of ourselves. You know, I didn't feel enough, I was small, and it's very hard for us to own the aggressive part of ourselves when we're the aggressors. I was typing out this reading last night with Ken Wilber, and Julian comes in and goes, I finished my book. He said, but I didn't like it. It was way too violent. It was all about the Civil War, and I didn't like it at all. And so I'm like, oh, he's disassociating from his violent side in my head. So I go, well, do you think you have a violent side? And he goes, oh, yeah, sure. It's just not that violent. And I thought, he's a kid. He hasn't learned that it's bad to be violent, to own his violence. And I thought, how many adults, if I said, do you have a violent side, wouldn't skip a heartbeat and say, oh, yeah, I have a violent side. You know, I think it's really hard for us to admit our own violence, and yet we see it projected in our culture all of the time, in all our movies and TV shows and our games. We have this incredibly aggressive side to us, and we pretend that doesn't exist. I'm willing to be a victim, but I'm not willing to own my aggressive, violent side. This is what owning all that shadow side, so we can't heal it out there until we heal it within us. Or we can do it both simultaneously. I don't mean to say don't stand up for injustices, but when I'm emotionally triggered, I have to heal it within. It will never be healed out there if I'm not doing the work. And that's what cleaning up is all about. We wake up, we grow up, and we show up, but we also have to constantly clean up. And that's my last point, which is it's never ending. That was the other part I had a hard time with. I always thought, well, if I just do this work, I'll be done with it, and I'll be perfectly enlightened, and I'll never be triggered again. And if I get triggered again, I'll always handle it skillfully, because now I know. My husband here. It's so true, though. This is where we get to be humble. That we want to handle it skillfully, and that's why we have to go to forgiveness again, which we're talking about next week, because we are not perfect. And as much as I've been doing this work, I'm far from perfect. And I know, well, maybe some of you are perfect. I don't know, but we always are growing in our skillful means, and that's what we're teaching each other. So even as we're creating the community, we might get irritated by people and what they're doing. Let's work on our skillful means rather than just attacking. And yet if we, or whatever, sabotaging or whatever, however we show up, and when we don't show up in the best way, we go to that place of forgiveness and return always to love, because this is all about coming to a place of finding love, not just in the absolute, in the transcendent, but loving all that we are in the humanness, and knowing that all our imperfection is actually perfect. All our limitations is part of our perfection. All our places where we get stuck is still part of our perfection, is still part of the love and the bliss of God. So this week, I just want to notice if there's places that you're not owning in yourself, and the way you do is if there's someone who's really irritating you. And it may be a constant thing, or it might just arise in a moment. Oh, that's really irritating me. It could be just on the news. That's really irritating me. The government really irritates me. Or it could be something very personal. My partner really irritates me. or a colleague. A lot of stuff comes up at work, in our workplaces. So just notice it and notice how you deal with it. And if there's a practice that you have, I'm also willing to work one-on-one or come to our class, or you have someone else that you're working with. But find a way. If you notice that things are irritating you, how are you personally dealing with that? And meditation is not the answer. It's part of the answer. It's always part of the answer, but it's not the full answer. Nor is prayer. Prayer is part of the answer. It's not the full answer. But love is always the answer. Let's pray. Man, is it hot in here? And yet, even in the midst of all of this, we do recognize and always begin and end with the awareness that God is always already fully alive and whole. This is always the beginning and the end of everything that we do throughout the day. That even in the midst of whatever is arising, there is this perfection, there is this wholeness that has never been hurt, harmed, or endangered. This wholeness and this perfection that is the creator and sustainer and the source of all living creation, not just this earth, not just this galaxy, but the galaxies upon galaxies, the billions and billions of stars, all phenomenal existence. It is the source of that which our mind can't even humanly wrap our ideas around. It is beyond anything we could ever humanly imagine. And yet we trust and know, just from what we know in our own personal life, that it is perfect. That there is this wholeness and this perfection that is closer to us than our very breath. It is always perfect. It will never be less than. It will never be other. And that this is the true being of who we are. This is the eternal sense. This is the eternal presence that carries us from lifetime to lifetime, through dimensions upon dimensions, on this incredible infinite journey of life. One power, one presence. And we are each it now. We are each this unique expression. We can never be outside of our perfection. We can never be other than our perfection. We can never be outside of this love. We can never fix or add on to this love. We can never take away from this love. This love is who we are now. And it is this love that fully embraces all that we are, our greatest darknesses and our greatest strengths and light. This love is infinite and contains all of it as us. There is no part of ourselves that it rejects. There is no part of itself that it does not embrace and hold and know that it is all okay. Any place in us of darkness that needs to be transformed, it is transformed only in conscious awareness of love. It is not transformed by rejection. It is only transformed in embracing. And so we embrace all that we are, all that we are. Our infinite power and our infinite glory we embrace. We embrace all of that we are, the dark and the light and the dark. There's nothing that we don't embrace in our heart right here and right now. So I just ask us to take a moment in this awareness and just see if there's anything in ourselves right now that we feel uncomfortable owning and embracing about ourselves. And if we can, just sink a little bit deeper and recognize that the love that we are totally and completely embraces this part of who we are. It does not shy away. It is not fearful at all. It does not judge this part of who we are. We have never been judged. We have never been rejected. We have always been seen, and we've always been fully and completely accepted. And it is in this wholeness and this perfection of all that we are, the absolute and the finite, the infinite and the relative, heaven and earth. We are the marriage of it all, here and now. and we experience that marriage of beauty and harmony in every aspect of our life. And as we know this about our individual life, we know this about our family, our friends, our co-workers, the Tri-Valley area, this nation, this planet, this galaxy, and all the cosmos. This divine perfection is now, right now, and it is all inside of us now. 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 Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. In deep abiding peace and joy, I just let this word be now, knowing that I just completely release it, and as I release it, it truly is already done.